by first understanding ourselves, becoming more familiar with ourselves, we can then better understand others and better understand the world around us. When we work with caregivers, we encourage them to start with their personal development first. Work on your own self, on your own awareness, on your own understanding of how the world works and becoming more familiar with your own thoughts, sensations, and reactions. And after that, we bring that out into the world and consider sharing this, what we've learned in these practices, with others. Now, as a practical matter, there is a ripple effect. We don't need to do anything to share the benefits of our practice with others, because if we become a little bit less neurotic, a little bit less reactive, a little bit more open-hearted, open-minded, and kinder and compassionate, just that shift in ourselves, that change in our own system changes the entire system around us. There's a ripple effect. So that ripple effect that we're talking about is the effect that happens just naturally when we take some time to understand ourselves better. It's really helpful if you're working with caregivers, of parents or teachers or doctors or nurses, because they tend not to be willing to carve out time for themselves. They will carve out time to do almost anything to help somebody else. But if they feel that what they're doing is self-help, they put that aside in service of others. So if we can reframe this for them and explain to them that by understanding themselves better, by taking better care of themselves, they in turn will be able to help others more. Often that's the shift in perspective that offers or allows buy-in into this work from caregivers who are so other-centric that they rarely take time for themselves. So I'm going to talk to you about the Inner Kids model here. Just a brief background. We've been around for over 25 years. The research on the Inner Kids Elementary program was published in 2010, and it was one of the first peer-reviewed, controlled, trialed school-based programs in the field to be published. And the work in the Inner Kids program is on offering secular mindfulness practices to children of all ages and to their caregivers, which means teachers, parents, therapists, and pretty much anybody who works with kids. So in the Inner Kids program, we have three baskets or three large umbrellas of qualities that are developed and highlighted. The first is attention, the second is balance, and the third is compassion, what we call the ABCs. And these qualities, the development of these qualities is a bit of a progression, but it's not an entirely linear one. It's helpful to view these qualities as developing attention and balance and compassion, but honestly, it's more of a circular, more of a spiral development than a linear development, and that the development of these qualities may seem very modest at first, but you'll see that it's meaningful and that it grows stronger over time. So by developing attention, balance, and compassion, these three qualities, these three golden threads that are laced through all of our navigation of daily life, we also build 6 social, emotional, and academic life skills that are very usable, trainable skills to help us solve problems and help us work with the issues that come up in our lives. Those 6 qualities are focusing, quieting, seeing, reframing, caring, and connecting. We'll talk about them in more detail as we progress through this presentation. And you'll see that focusing is at the center of this graphic and that it's a little bigger than the others. And that's because focusing is necessary. The capacity to attend is really necessary to bring any of these other life skills online. It's very tough to quiet your nervous system if you don't have attentional skills. Tough to see things, reframe them, and move toward caring and connecting if you don't have good, steady, stable, pliable attention skills. So that's why focusing is at the center, and why the swish for it, or the icon for it, is a little bit bigger than the others. You'll also see I don't have these life skills in a linear progression. I have them more circular with arrows pointing around to each other, because that really is how they develop. There's a sequence to them, to be sure, but really they are all constantly related to one another, changing and connected to each other. So in addition to the qualities, in addition to the life skills, there are also universal themes that we teach kids and caregivers that are connected to classical contemplative practices. So over thousands of years, contemplatives have compiled an extensive catalog that maps our inner and our outer world, including a set of themes that support and inform a wise and compassionate worldview. So in the Inner Kids model, and you can see this on the website at susankaisergreenland.com, you look towards Inner Kids, you'll see universal themes. You can click on it and you'll see the themes that we have identified in this program. And those themes basically are acceptance and appreciation and attention, attunement, behavioral restraint, contemplative restraint, cause and effect, clarity, compassion, discernment, empathy. Everything changes: interdependence, joy, kindness, motivation, open-mindedness, patience. As time passes, the older I get, the more I appreciate the importance of patience in this work. Present moment, self-compassion, and wise confidence. So we use a number of contemplative methods that have been developed over the millennia to build, to train, to evolve, to develop these trainable life skills. And the ones that we primarily use in the Inner Kids program are anchor practices. Those are where we anchor our attention, where we gather our attention around a single object. So we do that, maybe we're paying attention to the sensory experience of the feeling of our movement of breath, or to a sound, or to a picture in our head. That's visualization. We practice body scans, where we bring awareness to our body. We practice movement, so we are not always sitting still when we move, when we practice mindfulness and meditation with kids and adults. Open awareness and analytical practices, where we think through different problems, to be sure, but also think through different ways of perceiving our experiences and the world around us. So here's a chart, if this might help you, a grid. One of the schools I worked with for years said, Susan, get me a grid. So that's how we developed it. And this gets you a sense of how these different elements work together. There's a qualities, attention, balance, and compassion. There are life skills, focusing, quieting, caring, reframing, seeing, connecting. The contemplative methods I mentioned, anchor practices, awareness practices, analytical practices, body scans, and movement, and themes. And here are just a few of the selected ones that could fit on this slide, like open-mindedness, like appreciation, like interconnection, like how everything changes, like being helpful, just plain old helpfulness, and about letting go and letting be. So in the Inner Kids model, we teach, or we practice our mindful games through a sequence that closely tracks the scientific method: play, practice, share, and apply. So with play, the first thing we do is we have some fun. That makes mindfulness more fun for kids, which is really, really important to me. And it also brings them to the practice with a smile on their face, rather than a grim determination that, oh, I'm going to meditate and be mindful and improve. So instead, we come having some fun with some relaxation, with some joy. And then we play a mindful game, either standing or sitting down or walking or lying down, where we observe or become familiar with our minds and our bodies. And then we talk about what happened. That's the sharing piece. So it's play, practice, share, apply. The sharing piece is we talk about our experience. I think this is really, really important when working with kids, because kids are very often what we call a conscript audience. They didn't choose to be with us. Their moms or their dads or their teachers or their therapists or their grandparents thought it was a good idea. And so we want to hear what comes up in their minds and their body so that we can help them understand it, contextualize it, and perhaps normalize it. And then the last is apply. We want to be able to help kids apply what they learn, the skills they learn, to their daily lives. This is really, really important, because for kids to buy into this practice, especially if it wasn't their idea in the first place, it's very important that they understand how this is helpful to them. So the questions on this level, or this subdivision called apply, those questions are about applying what we learn to our real life situations. So this framework provides a safe and a contained space for kids and adults to speak openly with one another and to practice together. And this in and of itself is no small thing. It's through these conversations that kids can develop healthy, attuned, and attached relationships to other people, and healthier, more attuned relationships with themselves. So the mindfulness and meditation that we teach is taught largely through activity-based mindfulness, largely through games, and games that can often be dropped right on in to the daily routine of classrooms and families and clinicians everywhere. The first quality of attention, the first of the three qualities, attention, balance, and compassion, is attention or awareness. And some of these practices are something we would call concentration practices. They're usually the starting point for mindfulness and meditation, regardless of the age, because they're developmentally appropriate at absolutely every level. And they help people manage anxiety. They help people manage rumination, and they help people develop a greater capacity for self-regulation and for restraint. So under this general umbrella of attention or awareness come the two life skills, quieting and focusing. Sometimes kids and parents and caregivers, they need help tolerating levels of stress and strong feelings that can feel intolerable, and they want that help fast. So mindfulness-based quieting tools, which require some focused attention, provide surprisingly quick, short-term relief from overwhelming emotions. So the basic principle on how we use mindfulness-based strategies to downregulate our nervous system and to calm is that we move our attention away from what's bothering us to a neutral, a pleasant, or a neutral or a pleasant present moment experience. And of course, to do that, you need strong attention, or some attention at least, and that's why the quieting strategies are paired with focusing. So it's important to understand the relationship between mindfulness, stress, and the nervous system. If you're looking for secular mindfulness for calming strategies, for stress reduction, for largely therapeutic reasons, it's really key that you have a real general, at least a general basic understanding of how our nervous systems work and how kids' nervous systems work. So we talk to kids about their nervous system, and we talk about the system as being a little like an inner watchdog. It's an ancient survival mechanism that's in place to keep us safe. So that inner watchdog of ours, our nervous system, its job is to keep an eye out for danger. And when it senses danger, it protects us by activating the sympathetic nervous system, the SNS for short. Sorry, that's a lot of S's right there. The SNS for short. And shifting into a reactive mode called fight, flight, or freeze. So fight, flight, or freeze is a survival mechanism that we're born with. It gives us the energy to respond skillfully when we are in danger. How? By releasing hormones like adrenaline that make our hearts beat faster and that increase the speed of our breathing and the blood flow to our muscles. When all that energy is directed toward survival, that doesn't leave as much energy for our critical thinking capacities. And so when our energy is focused on fighting or fleeing or freezing, we don't have as much energy as we usually do to think, to listen, to learn, and to be open to new ideas. So all stress is not the same. The fight, flight, or freeze reaction response, it's a life-saving reaction to physical danger, like a fire or a car crash or a tiger chasing us in the jungle. But sometimes everyday stress leads us to respond as if we are in physical danger when we really aren't. This becomes a problem when our stress response is continually triggered by things like getting good grades at school, or wanting to be liked on social media, or fighting with or navigating problems with our siblings or our parents. So when the stress response gets activated by worrisome thoughts like, I'm going to fail, I'm not good enough, I don't have any friends, when that happens, we can end up creating an environment where it feels like we're actually in danger, but we're not. And when our stress response gets triggered for too long or too often by pressures like these, we can feel mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted. So there's a law called the Yorks-Dodson Law. And the Yerkes-Dodson Law is this idea of finding the just right level of stress. I think of it a little bit like Goldilocks in the Three Bears. What is just the right amount of level of stress, the amount that gives you enough activation that you're alert, that healthy amount of stress, but not so much that you tip over into fight, flight, or freeze. So one of the things, this image that's up, I really, really like this slide of that law, the Yerkes-Dodson Law, because it shows you that when you're at the top of the slide, the guy in the yellow shirt, that's when you're your best. You're alert, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn. You've got just enough pressure to have your brain light up and be interested and engaged, but not so much that you're going to tip over one side or other side of this curve. One side of the curve, the guy in the red shirt, is one that we're all familiar with. It's when people go into fight or flight. People can be reactive, people can be angry, people can be loud. It's really easy to identify. The other side of the curve, though, is one that often gets missed in our work with kids and teenagers. And that's when people withdraw. They go more into the freeze mode. They pull back. When our kids spend a lot of time in their room, when they spend a lot of time by themselves, kind of closed down, it's easy not to see that as a response to just a little bit too much stress. So what we're looking for is that just right level of stress, enough to make us alert, active, engaged, but not so much that it tips us over into fight, flight, or freeze, or in fight or flight, or in the other direction to freeze. So some people think of the stress response system as a light switch. It's an on or off switch, but that's really not the case. It's more like a dimmer switch that makes the light brighter or softer. And that's how we find that just right level of pressure. Sometimes kids don't relate so well to the idea of a light dimmer switch. They relate more to the idea of a sound fader, where you fade the sound up or down until you find just the right volume that works for you. So as I've been talking about, some stress or pressure is healthy. Too little pressure, we're not motivated to do anything. Too much pressure, and we close down, we feel stressed, we feel anxious. We do our best when we have that just right level of pressure. Mindfulness is very, very helpful here, because mindfulness helps us notice when we're under pressure, and where that dimmer switch, that fader is set, if it's too bright or if it's too dim. If it's too low, if it's too dim, mindfulness can help us dial it up with specific mindfulness-based practices that make us more alert and more energized. If it's too bright, mindfulness can help us dial it back with specific practices that help down-regulate our system and ground us more. Balance is the key to this process. And mindful strategies help you find that balance, that just right level of pressure, so you can do things you need to do without feeling exhausted or overwhelmed. So I was telling you how mindfulness is like an inner watchdog, and that it can help us find balance by knowing where that dimmer switch is set and whether it's too high or too low. And that's really the difference between a mindful watchdog, one that can discern, can help you understand where your dimmer switch is set, and just the plain old nervous system watchdog, which is going to react in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, depending on the input that it receives. So that's why the development of mindfulness is so helpful, is it adds a level of discernment to this function of our nervous system that is happening already. So our mental response to stress really changes depending how our bodies feel. So there's a connection between stress and tension, and that's what I want to talk about next. When we're stressed, our minds and our bodies constrict and they get very tight. So when that dimmer switch is set high, our minds tend to get tighter, and so do our bodies. And when we tense up, it's harder to listen, it's harder to learn, it's harder to be open to new ideas. So we've talked about how when our SNS is activated, our body releases adrenaline and our heart rate and our breathing speed up. Those are reasons that our minds and our bodies tense up. It's no wonder, because we are pushing for survival. So to manage stress when we are not in a situation that is life-threatening, it's very helpful to notice the sensation of stress in your body, to notice that you're feeling stress, your shoulders, your back, your neck, and then bring gentle awareness to those areas and see if you can soften and relax. And when your body softens and relaxes, your mind tends to relax and open and broaden too. So that's one of the mindfulness-based strategies that we use is we notice the tension in our body. And when our body is tense because of stress, we respond through relaxation. And then we are often pleasantly surprised that our mind then responds too. So when we relax our bodies, our minds tend to open. When we are stressed, our minds tend to get tense. So you see these two pictures here. You can see the guy in the green chair. His whole body is tensed up, and you can tell that his mental bandwidth is limited. And that's because he's feeling under pressure and stress. But when you relax, you can see the guy in the orange chair. He is feeling more open. He's feeling more relaxed in both his body and his mind. And that's why we teach kids that minds change bodies and bodies change minds. And this is another one of these key points that I hope that you take home with you from this presentation, is that mindfulness is not all about working with our minds, although that's certainly part of it, but it's awareness of our minds and our bodies in the world around us, and seeing the relationship between all of it. And especially in connection with minds and bodies, we see that if we're not very successful in helping our minds get more open, that we can shift our attention to our bodies and relax tension, and the body change will change the mind. And similarly, if we're finding that our bodies are feeling tight and we are having a hard time relaxing, that if we shift our attention to our mind and relax our minds, that our bodies will also respond by relaxing. So minds change bodies and bodies change minds. One way that we teach kids about how minds change bodies and bodies change minds is by using a snow globe. Remember I was telling you about mindfulness-based strategies where we move our attention away from what we're thinking about to a present moment sensation that is neutral or pleasant. And the snow globe is a great way to show kids how that works. So you see, if you look through this globe, you can see I feel still and I feel centered and I feel grounded right now. And you can see through the clear globe to the other side, right? That's how we feel when we are grounded. We're able to see to the other side, but sometimes we get under stress or we've got a lot of worries or concerns, and that's like the snow in the snow globe. And look, I can't see through to the other side anymore. With mindfulness, we stop thinking about what we're worried about and we move our attention instead to perhaps the feeling of the breath or just watching the snow settle. And when we do that, look what happens. Everything settles down at the bottom and soon we can see through the globe again. See? But when we get upset or nervous, look what can happen. It can be tough to see clearly. So what do? Again, we move our attention away from worrying about our thoughts or worrying about our stress into a present moment experience, like feeling the movement of breath or watching the snow. And sure enough, we can see clearly again. So this glitter ball really is a great way to show kids what happens when our minds get busy and how then it's tough to see clearly, and what happens when we ground ourselves by moving our attention to something other than what we're thinking about, and how that helps settle the glitter. This is also, if you're a parent, an amazing, it's almost a magical practice, I've got to tell you. If you put something like this on your kitchen counter and at some point you're feeling like you're not seeing clearly, you're feeling overwhelmed, then you can just pick it up and say, hey, to your children, look, at mommy's mind feels like this right now. So can you just hang out with me for a second and just feel your breathing with me, or watch the snow settle with me, and see if we can mommy can settle her mind and settle her body so that I can see more clearly. And when we model that for our kids, when we're feeling out of sorts, that is really the most powerful mindfulness practice of all. So that was attention. Now let's look at the quality of balance. Emotional balance really helps kids navigate the ups and downs of daily life. And so that's what we're going to be working with in this section, using these life skills, focusing and seeing. One of the favorite definitions or descriptions I have of mindfulness is the idea of mindfulness as a mirror. It's a mirror of what's happening now. So that mirror accurately reflects what's happening in our inner and outer worlds, and we see what's happening without an additional layer of thoughts, emotions, and stories that can blur the reflection. So we have a couple of stances of attention that we teach kids about. One is the spotlight, which is a focused attention, focusing on one thing and ignoring distractions. And the other is the floodlight of attention. It's a wider, more open stance of attention that includes absolutely everything in our experience. When we're mindful, we use both the floodlight and the spotlight stances of attention. So we become more familiar with thoughts and emotions and opinions and reactions and sensations, not because we want to change them, not because we want to get rid of them, not because we want to embrace some of them and push some of them aside, but so that we become comfortable with the full range of activity in our minds, and so that we better understand it. When we see our minds more clearly and we better understand our minds, then we can next better see and understand other people's minds and their hearts and their bodies, their thoughts, emotions, reactions, opinions too. So again, it starts with inner work, inner understanding, inner familiarization to help us better understand other people and the world around us. So what do we do? Big feelings, busy minds, they are going to come up during meditation. And what do we do then? When we're mindful, we become more familiar with these things, but some of them may come up and sometimes they may be difficult to navigate and they may be overwhelming. So when that happens, we do something that you might not exactly expect. One of the things we forget is that thoughts generate more thoughts. And there was a social psychologist named Dan Wagner who did a social experiment that really helped us understand what that looks like. So I'd like you to practice that social experiment with me for a second. And I'd like you for one moment or two, try not to think about a pink elephant. What happens when you try not to think about a pink elephant? Can you push the idea of a pink elephant away? Can you get rid of the idea of a pink elephant? More often than not, what happens is the more you try not to think about a pink elephant, the more a pink elephant comes to mind. So this idea that what we resist tends to persist is a very, very important and useful idea in all of mindfulness meditation. And it starts with this idea that when we're practicing, we're not trying to get rid of thoughts. We're not trying to get rid of emotions. We're not trying to get rid of thinking about pink elephants. We just develop a wide, spacious, open stance of attention with plenty of room for all of it. So we let it all come, we let it all go, and we do our best not to engage with these thoughts that come to mind. So when we become more mindful, when we become more familiar with our thoughts, then we can see our minds more clearly. But again, like I said, even with these skills, even with this understanding, sometimes big and overwhelming emotions come to mind. So when that happens, we give kids strategies to use if they start feeling overwhelmed by big feelings. Here are a few of them right now. If your mind is busy and it's hard to relax, we encourage you to sit and focus and silently say in when you breathe in and out when you breathe out. It's that simple. In, or out. Another one, if you're feeling really overwhelmed, and this works whether you're practicing mindfulness or meditation, or just in the middle of a stressful situation at home or at work or at school, just breathe in for 4, hold your breath for as long as it's comfortable, and then breathe out for 8. The breathing in for 4, holding the extended out breath has a way of settling your nervous system, slowing your heartbeat, and helping you to feel more grounded. Another great thing to do when you're feeling that strong emotions are bubbling up or your mind is very busy is just to move. You can get up and move from your chair, but you can also move in your chair, just silently swaying back and forth. You can shake and shake out nervous energy. You can rub your hands like this. Meditation and mindfulness does not need to be all sitting still, and that's really important when we're working with kids. So moving and shaking and dancing, those are other ways to manage strong emotions in busy minds when they bubble up. Walking is a really great way to manage strong emotions in busy minds. You can just take whatever practice you're doing and do it in connection with a walk. And then, of course, if these strong emotions come up and it's tough to manage them, even with these strategies we've given you, take a break, whether it's a short break of just a second or 2, open your eyes if your eyes are closed, or if it's a longer break where you take a break and come back the next day. All of that is fine. Remember early on, I told you that more and more I'm seeing how patience might be the most critical universal theme for us to develop and embrace, period, but especially when we're working with kids and families. Well, you can take a break and come back tomorrow. There's plenty of time to become more familiar with our minds and bodies. So if you're facilitating classes, I want you to know a couple of these basic rules to handle strong emotions that come up in mindfulness class. 1, keep your eyes open when leading a reflective practice so that you can see what's happening with the people in your group. If somebody, a child or an adult, seems particularly restless or overwhelmed, it's okay, just skillfully end the practice. Acknowledge feelings that come up without drawing too much attention to them. When appropriate, ask for group support. How many of you have felt something the same or similar? Show your hands. Contain the discussion. A tender topic can quite quickly be the subject of playground conversation or lunchroom conversation. So have a referral system in place, a supervisor or a peer support. So if something does come up in a group you're facilitating, you're not quite sure about how to handle, that you can talk to others and then always come back to your group and see if there's something else that you want to do to provide support and understanding. So a little bit more on the quality of balance and the life skills now of seeing and reframing. One of the pieces of the puzzle, the nervous system puzzle in this work, is the idea of the negativity bias. And our brains are wired for survival. And one way that we're wired for survival is to focus more on experiences that feel threatening and dangerous than those that feel positive and uplifting. So this is called the negativity bias, and it was really essential to our ancestors' survival. Unfortunately, right now, it's not as helpful often, because often what happens, we don't have the same physical threats to our survival, but still we tend to focus more on the difficulty, more on the challenges than the positive or the good that's happening in our life. So it's easy to get caught in a mental loop of thinking about our problems, especially during hard times. But if we learn to interrupt that mental loop, not pretend the problems don't exist, not ignore or deny the problems, but just interrupt the loop of thinking about them all the time, and take a moment to see the beautiful flower in the yard and appreciate it, or feel the sun on your face or the wind, or enjoy your comfortable bed or some time with friends or family. That helps us break the mental loop of thinking about the difficulties and make room for gratitude and appreciation to emerge naturally. So appreciation is a key part of this work. And when challenging circumstances show up, it's so easy to focus on what's going wrong and not on what's going right. So when we take more time to focus on what we're thankful for, we have studies now that show that that type of appreciation helps us become more resilient when life is hard. It helps us to maintain our optimism. It increases our feelings of happiness. It strengthens our immune system, and it promotes feelings of forgiveness and kindness to others. So surprisingly, it doesn't take a lot of time to experience these benefits, which is why we really encourage you in your work with kids and your work on your own to take in some time to just soak in the good. Next, remember, we had the quality of attention, balance, now compassion. And let's talk a little bit about that and the life skills of caring and connecting. We often talk about connecting to other people, and with kids especially, we talk about kindness and compassion to other people, and often forget to encourage them to connect to themselves, to be attuned to themselves, to be kinder and more compassionate to themselves. So we also connect to nature in a natural and an uncontrived way. And we connect to other people with a less guarded and a more relaxed and a more open mind. So when we are working with these life skills of caring and connecting, often we have to work with or consider conflict. And one of the things we talk to kids and parents about in connection with conflict is something called the backward law. And sometimes the harder you pull against conflict, the stronger the conflict becomes. This is similar to that pink elephant slide we had earlier. Remember, what we resist persists. If you think about a pink elephant, then it's very hard to stop thinking about them. And the more you think about the pink elephant, the harder it is to stop. In the same way, in a conflict situation, often the harder you pull against that rope, if it's like a metaphorical game of tug of war, the greater the conflict becomes. So often we just ask parents, can you drop the rope? Is this something that really needs to be fought over, or is this something you can just let go? And even if it is something that feels like it has to be managed or dealt with, is this the right time to do so? So that idea of how often do you really need to stay in conflict with your child, or how often can you relax and drop the rope and let things just be and settle and take their natural course? That is one of the really wonderful dances that we play with in the practice of mindfulness and meditation. And of course, there are those times when your child is having a meltdown and you need to get someplace and you need to get into the car and you just need to scoop them up if they're crying, put them in their car seat and buckle them up. So there are times that you really do need to draw the line and you can't drop the rope. But I have found in my own personal experience and in working with other people that very frequently we're able to drop the rope and not stay engaged in a conflict more often than we at first imagine. Related to the idea of dropping the rope is the idea of letting be and letting things go. This isn't the same as giving up. This isn't the same as not trying, but it's just being realistic that right now, this is the way things are. And struggling with them in the moment isn't really going to help. Battling with them in the moment may not be helpful. Right now, I need to let go, let things be, and then I'll come back and try to make change. So, one of the things that we do with kids, one of the games that we play with them is this idea of a pink bubble. It helps you acknowledge things are difficult and then try to let them go and not dwell on them. So how that works is we have kids imagine that whatever it is that is bothering them, they put it in a bubble. It can be a pink bubble if they like, or any color that they like. And then they watch in their imagination that bubble together with what it is that's bothering them float away. And maybe they even wave goodbye to it and wish it well. So teaching kids not to give up, but at the same time, not to battle with things where it's not going to be helpful to keep battling with them is really, really useful. And this very specific game of having especially younger kids imagine that whatever's bothering them, the thing that's bugging them, is in a bubble that is floating away is a really fun and playful and useful way to demonstrate this concept.